New York City's special aura and beauty today stem from its vibrant energy, iconic architecture, and unique blend of cultural diversity and dynamic. Urban life. This is a visible in the world renowned landmark like the Statue of Liberty, the Empire State Building, the sprawling green space of Central Park, and the distinct character of its many neighborhoods, creating a captivating, always energetic atmosphere. Sometimes I walk through New York City and I forgot how damn beautiful this city is. Well, when I have a new mayor, let's see how things will work out for him and what it will do for the city. But there's no place like the Big Apple, New York City. Good evening. Welcome to a special edition of the International Grapevine. This is your host, Wallingford Lee. Tonight on the International Grapevine, we want to take the opportunity to talk about the major run that just took place and how Mr. Mandini won it. And even though we had some serious competition with Cuomo and some other guys, he came out with flying colors. Mandini has set up a very high expectation for his mayoralty. He says it will enact the most ambitious agenda since Fiorello LaGuardia, who is widely regarded as one of the best mayors in New York City. So even though this guy is a new guy, he's comparing himself with Fiorello LaGuardia. But we'll see what he brings to the table and how is this going to take place. It's given us a great deal of satisfaction to have our special guest in the program, who's a gentleman that's been on our program various times and many times, doing an excellent job. And we're lucky enough to have him on board. I'm talking about my special guest, Mr. Hank Williams, English African professor at Lehman College. This gentleman have done such a wonderful bang-up job with us on so many different issues. Hank, welcome to our program. It's a pleasure to have you on board, of course.
Great to be back. Appreciate the invite.
Good. Hank, let's talk a little bit about Suran Mandini, who happened to win. He's a 34-year-old Democrat. Now is in new mayor of New York City. He won and knocked out all the other rivals. Was that luck, or you saw that coming?
No, I wasn't very surprised. After Mamdani won the primary to be the candidate for the Democratic Party in the general election, that put him in a very strong position. And for your viewers who are outside in New York City, registered Democrats and people who vote Democratic vastly outnumber Republicans in this city. So, generally speaking, whoever wins the primary for the Democratic Party tends to win the general election, and that was the case here. That's one thing. And the other thing is that Mamdani ran a very strong primary, and he also ran a very strong campaign and was very good about aggressively reaching out and consolidating support in areas where in areas where it wasn't as strong as it needed to be in the primary. So basically, he did a lot of what he needed to do.
Where did Mandani come from, and what is his real background? He sure got New York crown going. I mean, coming on. Where did he come from? It is my understanding from other people that he was not born in the United States of America, which I mean is not a big deal. He's running for mayor. Uh, what? Where did he come from, and what is he bringing to the table in a situation like this? I mean, make no mistake. I mean, I got to give him a lot of credit that he won. He ran against everyone that was there as a Democrat and was not afraid, even though a lot of what you would call the other party kind of started taking uh, shots at him here and there. But where did he come from, and what does he bring to the table in your mind?
Zoran Mamdani was born in Kampala, Uganda. His parents are actually fairly prominent people. His father is Mahmoud Mamdani, who is a professor at Columbia University, and his mother is Mira Nair, fairly accomplished filmmaker. They moved to South Africa, Cape Town, when he was 5 years old, and then immigrated to New York City when he was 7 years old. And, he grew up in New York City. And actually, I would say being born outside in New York, outside of the country, is not necessarily a handicap in a mayoral race because in that. Many New Yorkers can actually see themselves in one way or another. Either from either South Asian New Yorkers, of which there are quite a few. African populations in New York are one of the largest growing groups, and of course we have always had very strong presence from all areas of the Caribbean. So that I don't think actually worked against him or anything like that. After graduating from college, he spent years working as a housing counselor in Queens, and he successfully ran for the state legislature in 2020, and he was reelected in 2022 and 2024. So he actually has some governing experience, and he also has some connections at the state level, which are going to be very useful when he actually takes over the office as mayor and has to begin working with New York State to get a lot of what he wants to done.
Interesting, considering the fact that was not born here, but again, New York is New York. There are people from all walk of life. Make no mistake.
Absolutely.
Their parents are from a different place and then they were born here and stuff like that. I was surprised when he won, maybe because I didn't know a lot about him. Well, what
Hmm.
I was shocked a little bit about is that we had the opportunity to do a program on Quorum about 4 or 5 months ago.
Hmm.
And I felt at the time with a couple of attorneys in that week that I spoke to that they felt that he could not win. I was shocked. I thought that Cuomo would make it. I thought that he would give Mandani a run for his money, and in the reality, he lost. Then he decided to go in afterward in a different manner, and even so, he got crushed. Were you surprised that he got lost? That he didn't make it as a mayor, and that he got crushed in this running that he went to be a mayor of New York City?
No, especially after he failed to win the primary election. And there are a few things. I mean, one, Cuomo does have significant legislative experience, and he had and still has very strong name recognition, both of which are very important in campaigns. But there were a few things. Number one is the fact that he resigned as governor after several scandals where he was accused of harassing women. That's one that put a significant mark on his record and inclined a lot of people against him. The second thing is that he simply has not been a full time resident of New York City in literally decades. And that came out a little bit too, both in terms of the primary and general election, where some of the issues he was speaking about they're kind of wonky policy type issues, but it was clear to actual New Yorkers, many of whom kind of understand those nuances, that he had a good general big picture idea of what's going on in the city, but wasn't as tuned in to many of the details as was Zoran Mamdani. And I think those two were very key things. Besides that was just the fact that Mamdani ran an extremely energetic campaign, and he had a huge fired up base of people working for him. It had a very grassroots feel. He very successfully energized younger voters and younger activists who often feel displaced from the political process, and doing that also successfully brought many new people in. One of the big things about the election was simply just turnout. We had the largest voter turnout since David Dinkins won in 1989. And interestingly, that was New York City's first Democratic Socialist mayor, which a whole lot of people don't talk about. But David Dinkins was a member of DSA, the group Democratic Socialists of America, that Mamdani well.
Well, one thing I was surprised about with Cuomo was the sexual situation. I was very surprised by that and taken back, considering the fact that he came from good stock in terms of his father and stuff like that. And I want to remind you also, he's a New Yorker. He was born in Queens, but I was very, very surprised that the audience was not there for him. And I have a funny feeling that the governor did not vote for him and she was not on board also. Am I mistaken that she was in favor of Cuomo at all or anything like that?
The current New York State Governor Kathy Hochul was fairly quiet through the primaries, which I think was appropriate, and not only appropriate, but that's what she's generally done during her tenure in office. Uh, After Mamdani won the primary election, she very strongly signaled that she would work with him, and as a matter of fact, appeared with him in a very big rally he had on the eve of the election, as did both heads of New York State, the head of New York State Senate and New York State Assembly, both of which actually endorsed Mamdani, which is very, that was a very significant display, because it shows that he has the support that he's going to need at the state level. And a lot of cities probably work this way, but in New York City especially, many of the services that we provide in the city, and many of the things that we want to do, have to actually be approved by the state. And so if you don't have support from the state, you're going to have trouble implementing your agenda. And as a matter of fact, Bill De Blasio, a former mayor before our previous one, unfortunately had that problem, in that he and Cuomo did not have they had an antagonistic personal relationship, and Cuomo ended up taking a lot of that out on a lot of what was essentially personal animosity out on the city, and some of the things that it wanted to do. And some of that may have actually come back to Cuomo as well. It's hard to tell how much, because people's memories tend not to be very good. But for myself, and I'm sure other people who are paying attention and who remember, that had to. I can't imagine that didn't come into people's thinking as well. However, I will say that part of the reason Cuomo did as well as he did in the primary, and did well enough, he decided to run as an independent in the general election, is simply just, I think, was simply just name recognition, particularly with the black population in New York, and especially older black voters who made very politically calculated decisions. But I think one very important thing is that Mamdani significantly increased of his share and support of black voters. As a matter of fact, black voters were the strongest. Were actually the strongest category in voting for Mamdani in the general election. Stronger than any other demographic group. So I think that shows. I think that shows a few things. I think that shows, one, that the more people became comfortable with Mamdani and hearing his message and seeing who he is, the more they saw what he might possibly, what he could bring to the office. And to go back to a thing that I said earlier, Mamdani got a lot better at talking very directly to the black community and black leaders, and more specifically, people who would be, who would be resonate and older black voters would have trust in. And I think those are really things that swayed people.
I agree with you, but I want to go back to one thing. Did Cuomo ever try as much as he could to get the black vote? Did he make um, areas of Queens, Brooklyn, stuff like that? Did he get into these type of areas and try to bring the people alive, or he just had the confidence that he could make it? Because make no mistake about it, you mentioned a lot of things in that Mantini did. I mean, he walked out there. He went out there. He looked for people in the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island. So what happened to Cuomo there? Because I mean, he's a New Yorker. I mean, it's kind of strange question, but the more I look at it, he couldn't cut it, and it didn't work out. And there were problems upstate, and then he went in as an independent, and even as an independent, it didn't work out for him. What do you say?
No, I think you nailed it, and you make a very good point. I mean, aside from Mamdani just running a very smart, very energetic, very grassroots campaign that really successfully tried to meet people where they are, Cuomo was campaigning really much more from a high level. Really almost as if he were an incumbent and trying to, and just trying to run for reelection. And I think that was definitely one of the that worked against him, because even though he was somewhat of a known quantity, which again can work either for or against you, because you have to run in your entire record, and people know that. But he this time around he did not do the type of, what political scientists like call retail politics, but means just showing up at tons and tons of events, getting in situations where you can talk one on one with groups and people, and that didn't really happen this time. Cuomo basically did that with several strong trade unions, and that was primarily for the primary campaign, and that's actually important in New York City too, because there's a very big percentage of unionized workforce here. That didn't actually extend out from there, and even reports from many of the union events were that they were very heavily scripted, very top down. We got some reports that union leadership were essentially pressuring people to show up. So it wasn't really they didn't really have the feel of being very authentic.
Very interesting indeed. I always felt that Cuomo might have had a chance, but I was wrong. But going forward, at any moment as Mandini started and he started moving, and you brought up a very important point. I saw him going to Brooklyn, and I was shocked down. I saw him going to Brooklyn and getting involved with the minorities and stuff like that. And I said to myself, I guess in experience, he's not going to cut the mustard, but he did very well. From there, I think he went up to the Bronx, then to Staten Island, and he was not afraid to speak. And a lot of questions were asked to him. I think one of the things that he brought to the table, which to me was amazing, and everywhere he went, he brought up one of the things that he talked about is housing. One of the things that
Hmm.
he's talking about is getting proper shelter for the people in
Hmm.
need, the Latinos, the black community, and stuff like that. So when this man began to speak about those type of things, I kind of stood back because I'm a New York and I've seen a lot of bull
Hmm.
around what's going on. And I don't want to say it because, but he was not afraid. And he went out to these folks and talked to them. What type of feedback do you think that he got as he began to penetrate these different areas? This is the correct word, penetrate. He was not afraid. He walked around among the crowd and he asked them questions. Well, how did you feel about that?
Well, there are two questions there. One I think we've talked about a little bit, in the fact that
Yeah.
he ran a very good classical campaign, which I mean, really. to a certain extent, there you see the upside of his age. He ran a campaign with the level of enthusiasm and energy that that is much easier to do if you're somebody Mamdani's age as opposed to Cuomo's age. That's one. But to get into the second part of your question, which I actually think is very important, and that's going to be the much more difficult one, is that Cuomo's rather Zoran Mamdani's general message of affordability resonated widely across the city, and across really across the ideological spectrum. There were a lot of I think there were a lot of people who weren't ideologically aligned with with where Mamdani says he comes from, but recognize the message, and that was important. The second piece is that what he is second piece is that implementing his strategy is going to be going to be a very difficult process, and part of that is because many of the things you're talking about are very deep structural issues in New York City that are that are going to be very difficult to fix. The housing one being being one of the main things, simply just because there just plain is not a whole lot of available undeveloped land in the city. That's number one. And uh, number two, a lot of it does not lie where people actually want to live, which in the city is very highly the best places to actually build that sort of thing are near existing subway and transit lines. And and many and just plain land is very expensive here. Just to put it bluntly. So I think those you need a long term strategy to try and deal with that. Now there are some immediate things that Mamdani can actually do. One of which is he's claimed that he's going to do a rent freeze on what are called rent stabilized apartments here, and I won't get into the wonky differences, which interestingly was one of the things that Cuomo didn't fully understand. But short answer is roughly 1 in 8 New Yorkers live in apartments that are called rent stabilized, which means they were built before, believe they were built before 1972. But essentially, it is a program where, it is a program where the city basically brokers agreements of leases between tenants and landlords, and they negotiate in terms of how much of a percentage leases can raise each year, depending on costs and depending on a whole lot of other things. And it also includes provisions for essentially if you live up to the terms of your lease and don't violate them and are in the agreement, then your lease needs to be renewed as long as you do that. That's it in a nutshell. There's a whole lot more. So one of the things that Mamdani has promised is that he's going to freeze rents on those apartments, which is actually something that is totally within his control because the board that makes those decisions that I was talking about in terms of how much the increases can be per year is entirely appointed by the mayor. And although within that, you have representatives of the landlords, you have tenants, you have representatives to look after the interest of tenants, and you have a couple neutral people on there. But that's something that Mamdani can do, and as a matter of fact, former Mayor Bill De Blasio was successfully able to do several times while he was in office. So that's one thing Mamdani can do. Maybe not immediately, but definitely within his term, and that will be felt by a lot of people. That's not going to actually get at the second piece of it, which is increasing the amount of housing, and more importantly, increasing the amount of housing that people making modest incomes here can afford. And that's the piece of it that is much more logistically and politically difficult.
Interesting, interesting indeed. One of the things that bothered me a little bit is talking about the increase of housing for the needy. That's one that bothered me, and what Mandani could do about that. And when we talk
Well, I'll say
about,
it's actually not just for the needy. That's one, but where we are. I mean, you literally have a problem where middle class and even and almost even some people who would be considered upper middle class by their income in other areas, have a difficult time finding housing, particularly if they have larger families. I mean, that's how severe that's how severe costs have gotten in the city.
but he seemed determined to move forward on these things. And I talked to a couple of people in the neighborhood of Brooklyn because I grew up in Brooklyn, and they would said to me, "He's not afraid to come and
Yeah.
talk to us." He did a huge meeting at one place in Brooklyn where he said, I spoke for about 25 minutes, and then he turned around and he said to the public that was there, you are welcome to call on me to ask me any questions. I just don't want to be a mayor in picture. Whatever
Hmm.
bothers you, I need to know how to react and whether I can help you, and if it makes sense to support you, which was bold movement. He also had the opportunity thing, and I think that he talked to the Amsterdam News. I was shocked when I found out that he had the opportunity to talk to the Amsterdam News. And apparently, based on what I heard through the grapevine, the conversation went very well. He delivered himself with a certain amount of authority, of respect, and gave them the opportunity to ask him any question. How the conversation with Amsterdam News took place, because I heard just through the grapevine, but it turned out to be a beautiful situation because he was able to respond to the questions from the Daily News, from the Amsterdam News, and from other outlets. But it's my understanding that he did a wonderful job anywhere that he went to the Latin community, to the black community, and to anyone that was needed. I mean, he went everywhere, not just the needy or the minority. So it tells me that he came out with a certain amount of power. And I think in one moment he said, "This moment of political darkness, New York will be a light that will be lit up by yours truly." And he went on and given a long speech. Were you aware of any one of those things?
Yes, and I
Mhm.
think actually sitting down with the Amsterdam News was one of that sort of signaled the change in his strategy in deciding to talk. And for your viewers who don't know, Amsterdam News is a black newspaper. It's actually one of the oldest black papers in the country, if not
Yes, it
if not the oldest one. They've been publishing since the 1920s. Still come out weekly and very much focused on Black New York. The I mean the thing I would say that I think he could have and should have done better was actually making himself available to outlets like that, much earlier in the election cycle. And frankly, I think, had he done that, he probably would have won by even more. Although that's an unknowable thing. But that was certainly a key thing and indicative of their strategy overall, and I would say a very good sign in terms of you can't you really can't tell what's going to happen until somebody gets in office. But much of what you can do is by reading how they're moving, how they're reacting, how they're talking to people, what issues seem to be central, and more than that, how they're reacting to people's honest feedback, and even more than that, criticisms. And those were things that I think he did very well in the campaign, and actually got better at as time went on. And he said himself, look, I am young, but I do bring some experience to this, and more important than that, I'm willing to a learn, and b surround myself with people who can give me the proper guidance and proper counsel. And I think this sort of shows that approach.
Well, in one of the questions that he was out in Queens, uh, one question by a community uh, for him was a democratic socialist. Do you get frustrated when people focus so much on race instead of class? Well, guess what? He stood up and he says, I am here for you and everyone. Okay? It's
Hmm.
not about race. My job is to work for each and every one of you here in New York. I like the questions and I'm not hiding from it. You can ask
Hmm.
me every possible question that come to you as long as it's logical and decent and I will respond. And he did. He did. He came through with flying colors. And I'm telling you, I think the meeting that he had with that newspaper kind of helped him
Hmm.
and bring him up. I think the newspaper was kind of happy to see him come alive. And in one of the conversation, he says to the public that was there, people, I spoke. Feel free to speak. Raise the power of your conversation with logic. So it seems like he really came on strong, and those type of things help him win the vote and get forward. Won't you agree with something like that?
I would to a certain extent, and I would say there's fortunately he displayed a little bit more nuance than simply just reducing things to class, because the problem is that when you say that to black folk, to a certain extent it's true, but what we hear, particularly older black folk who've been through the cycle a few times, is that we're going to get left behind. And that's that partially because we've seen that happen. Other groups have been taken care of when the message is simply just something based on economics. But when it comes to some of our particular situations, and particularly some of the structural things that have often locked us out, even when you have that approach, that doesn't resonate. So I think Mamdani did a fairly good job of understanding, of centralizing his message around affordability and making that something that could broadly resonate with people, and yet still being able to talk to people about some of the very specifics in terms of their group situations, which is a very difficult it's a very difficult needle to thread. And it's fraught with all sorts of traps.
Well, it backs up another thing that he said in two conversations that I'm aware of. He says, my responsibility is with all of the people, not
Hmm.
just one set of people. My responsibility is to deal with the Jewish community, the brothers and sisters, the Oriental people. And I think those are nice words coming from him. And sure, as a matter of fact, I understand him that he's looking for the possibility to have a very important meeting with the president. So I hope that that will take place and that it work out for both of them.
That
Blanca,
actually happened. That actually,
mm,
interestingly, that actually happened today. And interestingly, I was trying to quickly read through some of the news reports and listening to the news reports just before we actually came on the air, because it is very new. But the initial reports of it were that it went fairly well, which is not a totally substantive, but definitely when you're dealing with the current president, who expressed a lot of animosity toward him, and can be incredibly volatile and mercurial at times. Just the fact that they were able to get together and have a productive discussion. Trump came out saying fairly good things, that he was, that essentially that he had expected one person, and when he got to, after he sat down with Mamdani, he saw, he saw what he thought was a totally different person. But I think that's one of the things that kind of feeds into what made Mamdani successful. And you have to be very careful in terms of simply just framing political candidates in terms of the likability. But it's absolute. a part of it. And Mamdani comes across as somebody who's very who's very approachable, very warm, very very genial, and willing to engage. And that but the thing is that that's a tool, and it can be used strategically. And I have to imagine that they understood that going in to meet with Trump and wielded that tool.
Well, that's very interesting indeed. I can tell you that I heard them talking about both of them getting together, and I thought that was a good idea. Uh, Trump is the president of the nation, and he's going to have his pros and cons. And Mandani is going to be the mayor of New York. So it's good that they had a conversation. Hopefully, they were able to reach to something proper with good understanding and communication about whatever their discussion was, which would be good for the entire American public. Mandani on the Manhattan side and the president of running the nation. So it was very. I'm sure it was a very interesting meeting, and hopefully it went good. We hope so.
Yeah, I wouldn't extrapolate too much off it, because the problem is that some of the basic policies this administration is doing are incredibly harmful to New York. And much of the harm has already been done in the in the last budget bill that was passed, that they were calling the big beautiful bill. So there's nothing that you can do to other than repealing it or revising it to undo the billions of dollars in terms of cuts to Medicaid and in other areas that quite simply that's money the city and state aren't going to have. But much of what he can do is mitigate some of that process, and definitely just defuse the situation, and hopefully discourage the president from seeking further cuts, or at the very least seeking to further a vendetta, very specifically against New York City, which is one of the
I,
things that he would do, if Mamdani won. So I think even just coming out with what they have was that was a victory in itself, or at least about as much as you could expect.
Very interesting. Like I said, I hope they work it out in a positive way. These type of things then will be good for all of our customers that are involved, that live in the city and stuff like that. I pray that they work out things as grown person and have great intention. One of the things that surprised me, I want to bring it up to you guys who run it. I understand that Sharpton is back in Mandani. Were you aware of that?
I am. That
Okay.
was something that unfolded relatively late in the election cycle. But Mamdani and his people had been actually courting Al Sharpton. He made Mamdani, that is, made some appearances up at the National Action Network, which is Sharpton's home organization,
Yes.
and has base up in Harlem on 145th Street. So, and Sharpton is a you know Sharpton's kind of a long time power player in the Democratic Party, and particularly in terms of the of Black Democrats. So, number one, it was one of the things that Mamdani just had to do. If he wanted to win and wanted to reach a certain class of black folk, it's a connection that had to be made. On Sharpton's side, I think it got to the point where once you saw the type of momentum that Mamdani's campaign had, even if you weren't really allied with him, it would have been it would have been not very strategic, I'll say, on Sharpton's part, not to begin to engage with him on a certain level.
I agree with you 100% there when, and also the presentation. I want to take this opportunity on behalf of the family of Grapevine to say to you, first of all, thank you so much for your views that you gave us. I hope at the same time also that things work out between the president and Mandani. And I like the opportunity that Sharpton is also involved with Mandani. So again, we thank you so much for being our special guest and hope to have you on board real soon again, my brother. I really
I'm
hope
looking
that we,
forward to it.
okay. And once again, thank you so much. And this is Warren Furley saying goodnight for the International Grapevine. We hope that you had the opportunity to listen to this interview where we talked about this man that won and is going to be the mayor of New York. I'm talking about Ron Mamdani. And all the things that he wants to do and would like to do, and the tables, them stairs that he would like to climb. I guess we should work with him and have the opportunity to work with him, and that things will work out well. And again, thanks, folks, for watching International Grapevine one more time. Good night.